This video will demonstrate how to configure PI Buffer Subsystem version 4.3 for Pi API interfaces. The current state of my interface machine is the same as at the end of the video installation of PI Buffer Subsystem. So I already have PI Buffer Subsystem version 4.3 installed, but it has not yet been configured. If I open PI ICU, we can see that I already have two Pi interfaces configured, running, and sending data. So the first instance is writing to my two-member Pi data archive collective named Carbon, and the second instance is writing data to Graphite, which is the name of an independent Pi data archive server. Please keep in mind that during the configuration, the services for these Pi interfaces will need to be stopped. So make sure you have either the appropriate downtime scheduled or you have interface failover configured to mitigate the data downtime necessary for the initial configuration. You will also need to be logged in as local administrator to follow along the steps in this video. Okay, so before we get started, what exactly do we mean by Pi API interface? Well, Pi API is one of the data access protocols available for the Pi data archive server. It's already been deprecated for new products, but it is still very prevalent in most of our Pi interfaces. So as a general rule of thumb, for Pi interfaces, you will want to configure Pi API buffering to make sure that data being sent by those Pi interfaces is buffered. One notable exception to this rule is Pi batch interfaces. Pi batch interfaces write data to the Pi data archive server in a very special way, so generally they are not configured with buffering. Another thing to note is that if your Pi interfaces write annotations to your Pi data archive servers, you will also want to configure Pi SDK buffering in addition to Pi API buffering. So Pi API buffering will be covered in this video, and to configure Pi SDK buffering, please watch the video Configure Pi Buffer Subsystem for SDK. Alright, so let's go ahead and get started. The first thing that we'll want to do is to change the service account that the Pi Buffer Subsystem service runs under. So this is optional, but it's highly recommended that you follow this step to follow security best practices. So I have the services applet open, and I can go down to Pi Buffer Subsystem and go to the properties. Then I'll go to the Logon tab and enter the credentials for my custom service account. Alright, so once that's done, notice that the service is not running yet. So it's set to manual and it's stopped. So we don't need to do anything here because the new installation wizard will take care of everything with the service for us. So please make sure you don't start the service just yet. Okay, so once that's done, we can begin the new installation wizard. And the way we configure that is by going to PI ICU Tools Buffering. So an important thing to remember is that when you're configuring buffering for Pi API interfaces, you need to do it through PI ICU. So since Pi API buffering has not been configured before, as stated before, this will actually open up a new installation wizard. So once the new installation wizard has come up, the first thing that it does is that it actually scans the machine for all of the installed Pi interfaces. So we can see here that it's detected both instances of my Pi interfaces, and I can choose which one of them I want to configure for Pi API buffering. So for the purposes of this video, I'm only going to select one instance for now so that later on I can show you how to configure the other instance in case you've already gone through this new installation wizard. So I'm going to have the first instance selected and I'm going to click Next. I'll need to re-enter the credentials for my custom domain service account. And note that this custom domain service account is going to be added to the local administrators group on the interfaces machine. So this is a necessary prerequisite for the service account that Pi Buffer Subsystem runs under. The new installation wizard will then do a connection test to verify that Pi Buffer Subsystem can both connect and authenticate to the Pi data archive server. So we can see that it actually returned with an error saying no access secure object. And this is because I have not yet configured the security configuration on the Pi data archive server to allow Pi Buffer Subsystem to connect and authenticate. However, notice that it did pick up our custom domain service account. So what we can do is using this service account, we can now configure a Pi mapping on the Pi data archive server. So at the bottom, what I can do is make the selection for Pi mapping and then click Browse. Browse will bring up a list of all the PI identities on the PI Data Archive server. I already have this PI identity PI interfaces buffers created beforehand, so I'm going to choose this for my PI mapping. Once that's selected, all I have to do is click Create. It will then retry the connection test using that mapping that we just created, and we can see that it now returns with a green check mark and success. Furthermore, we can see that the authentication method was using SSPI, or Windows Integrated Security, and that it did get the PI identity that we chose for it. So let's just verify all of the security configuration on the PI Data Archive itself. So I have PISMT open here, and I'm going to connect to both members of my PI Data Archive collective. So underneath Security in the Mappings and Trusts plugin, I can see that it did create the mapping on both members of my collective for this custom domain service account. Additionally, we can see that it did get the identity that we specified in that new installation wizard. So what other security configuration is necessary? Well, at the database security level, we need to make sure that the PIBuffer Subsystem service account's PI identity has read access at the PIPoint database security level. So this is covered here by PIWorld. If PIWorld were not listed here, then I would need to make sure that my PI identity PI interfaces buffers had read access at this level. Additionally, we need to make sure that the security is configured properly on each of the points that PIBuffer Subsystem is going to write to. So let me just bring up one of the points that's being written to from one of the interfaces on this machine. If we go to the Security tab, basically what's necessary here is that the identity also needs to have read access within the point security. So once again, this is covered by PIWorld. If PIWorld were not here, I'd have to have PI interfaces buffers listed here with read access. And within data security, we need to give that PI identity both read and write permissions. So we can see that that's already done. So basically, the security configuration looks good on the PI Data Archive server. So on the next screen, the new installation wizard wants us to choose the location where the PIBuffer Subsystem queue files are going to be saved. The recommendation here is to choose the disk drive with the most available disk space, but which is also not the operating system disk drive. So in this case, I'm going to choose to put the buffer queue files on E drive, since it has the most available space, and also it does not have the operating system installed on it. Okay, so the new installation wizard does one final verification, and we can see that I got all green check marks. The service was started up successfully, it was able to connect, and the upgrade to PIBuffer Subsystem is now complete. So we can exit the new installation wizard. It's going to bring up this GUI tool called Buffering Manager, but we'll get back to that in a little bit. So within PI ICU, if I just load up that interface, we can see now that there's a box called Buffering Status, and for that PI interface that I just configured buffering for, it now says on, which means it's now buffered. However, if I go to my second instance, we can see that for this second instance, the buffering status will say off, and that's just because during the new installation wizard, I had it deselected. And all I have to do to configure it for buffering now is to click this enable button. This enable button will bring up the add new server wizard so that I can configure the buffering for this other PI Data Archive server, Graphite. So it's basically going to be the same procedure. We're going to create a mapping for it on the Data Archive server so that it can connect and authenticate using that custom service account. And once that's done, then all we have to do is restart the interface. So this is the difference between configuring it through the new installation wizard and through the add new server wizard. So if we go back to that instance, going to Graphite, we can see that the buffering status says on. However, I know that it's not being buffered because it has not been restarted yet. A restart is always necessary when configuring running PI interfaces for buffering. So the way that I can confirm this is going to Buffering Manager. So Buffering Manager is a new GUI tool introduced in PIBuffer Subsystem version 4.3. It's basically a dashboard that shows you health and status updates for all of the PyData archive servers configured for buffering. Additionally, it's the central place where you can go to change all of the configuration settings for PIBuffer Subsystem. So on this initial screen, this is what's called the global page, and it shows you all of the statuses and counters for PIBuffer Subsystem globally. So this would include all of my PyData archive collectives and PyData archive servers. So we can see that globally, PIBuffer Subsystem has already sent 7,712 total events across all of my PyData archive servers. If I wanted to see the counters just for my PyData archive collective, I can choose the collective down at the bottom. And we can see that at the collective level, it's sent about 8,490 events. And if I wanted to drill down further, I can go to a specific member and see how many events were sent just to that PyData archive collective member itself. So going back to the global page, if I go to the Graphite PyData archive server, we can see that it has 0 total events sent, even though the Pi interface is running. So as mentioned earlier, this is because the interface was not restarted after configuring PIBuffer Subsystem for it. So all we have to do is restart the interface within PI ICU. So keep in mind that if you don't have interface failover configured, this may result in some data loss while the interface is restarting. Okay, so now that we've restarted the interface, we can see that there are now events being sent through PIBuffer Subsystem for the Graphite PyData archive server. So one other important thing to know about Buffering Manager is that you either need to be a local administrator or within a Windows group called Pi Buffering Administrators to make configuration changes within Buffering Manager. So this Pi Buffering Administrators user group is installed on the machine when you install PIBuffer Subsystem version 4.3. So I can see this group by going to Manage My Computer and going to the local users and groups. Within here, I can see there's a group called Pi Buffering Administrators. So you can add users here who you would like to be able to make configuration changes to PIBuffer Subsystem, but who you may not necessarily want to add to the local administrators group.